Good morning, boys and girls. Thanks for joining with me as we share a story together. Even though we're doing this virtually online, it's great to be able to talk with you. And I want to tell you today a little story about being humble, about humility. Do you know what the word humble means or humility means? Well, it kind of means when you don't think so much about yourself as you think about others, about how you want to help build other people up to become all that God intended them to be. Or another way of looking at being humble or humility is to look at what it's not, or the opposite of what it is. And the opposite of being humble is those sorts of people who think that they are the best at everything in the world, that they are way better than somebody else. Now, I'm going to tell you a little story about a couple of flowers. One who was just like that, who thought that they were better than everybody, and another flower that wanted to help build everybody else up. And the one flower is Ruby Rose, and the other one is Dora the Dandelion. Now, Ruby Rose, as you can imagine, you've probably seen a rose, or especially a ruby rose, a red rose. They're just a beautiful, gorgeous flower. Now, you got to be careful when you hold on to these roses that you don't grasp the stem too much because they've got these prickly thorns on them. But you see how beautiful red roses can be, especially in a bouquet that you can buy. Well, Ruby Rose knew that she was the most, or she thought she was the most beautiful flower in her garden. And here's a picture of Ruby and all of her flowers. This is actually a garden. It's like an archway that's right from the ground up. It's 10 feet high. It's full of red roses. And it's just beautiful and it smells so lovely. Well, Ruby Rose is the biggest and the best looking flower in that garden. And she is so proud, and she thinks that she is the greatest, and nobody else, none of the other flowers in her garden, in the garden, can stand her, except there's little Dora the Dandelion. And the dandelion isn't certainly not in the same flower bed as the rose. I mean, it just can't even come close. But there's Dora the Dandelion flower. And the little yellow flower versus this great big red, gorgeous, lovely smelling rose, Ruby Rose. Well, Ruby, she needs special treatment. She has to be pruned periodically in order to grow bigger and stronger. She has to have a dusting of some chemicals on her so that the bugs don't destroy her plant. And she has to have special nutrients put into the ground, special fertilizer put into the soil, so that she grows even stronger and bigger and better. And as, of course, Ruby the Rose thinks, better than all the other flowers in the garden. And you know, she wishes, the one thing she wishes, Ruby Rose wished, that she could have more friends just like her. More beautiful roses around her. And it takes so long for a new rose to start to bloom. And that's the only thing that, well, that's not quite the only thing that she's upset about. There's one other thing that she's upset about. Ruby Rose doesn't really like sharing the garden with Dora the gardener, Dora the Dandelion. Not at all. I mean, Dora the Dandelion, as everybody knows, is just a lowly weed, and Ruby Rose is the queen of the garden flowers. But Dora doesn't mind at all. Every time there's a new flower that is brought into the garden and planted in the garden, Dora introduces them to Ruby Rose. And she tells the new plants just how wonderful Ruby Rose, the stalk of Ruby Rose, where she comes from, and how pure she is, and what a beautiful flower Ruby Rose is, and what a lovely smell Ruby Rose has. Well, one of the things that Ruby Rose loved to do, besides when nobody was looking and when there were no people like you and I in the garden, Ruby Rose loved to boast in front of the whole garden about how she was the best. She was perfect. She was the best. You ever known people like that? Oh my goodness. And she also loved to make fun of Dora the Dandelion and kept telling her how old she's growing and how withered away she's looking because look at your gray hair, Ruby Rose says to Dora the Dandelion. I mean, yeah, you can see. It looks like gray hair. on Dora now. Well, Dora didn't let that bother her. She understood. And God had a special plan for Dora. You see, when the wind blew, that gray hair is actually seeds. And the wind would take the seeds and plant them somewhere else so that there would become fields full of other Dora dandelions, beautiful little yellow flowers that even Ruby Rose couldn't count. And it drove Ruby Rose crazy. Ruby was so proud, thinking that she was the best, the greatest thing. And actually the best attitude flower in the whole garden was Dora the dandelion. And as Jesus says in the New Testament, he says it several times, whoever puffs themselves up, whoever is so proud of themselves and looks down their nose at others, that proud person is going to be humbled. And whoever lives like Dora the dandelion, who loves to help build other people up, whoever is humble will be lifted up, will be exalted in God's kingdom. Incredible. So who would you rather be like? Ruby Rose or Dora the dandelion? We know who Jesus was most like. Jesus came to serve. And he gave himself, his life on a cross, so that we could follow his example and help build up other people. Thanks for joining with me this morning, boys and girls. I hope you have a wonderful and a blessed week in the week before us. Peace be with you.